Everybody ready?
Hello. I'm always having fun. Hello. Hello.
All right, call the meeting to order. Would all who wish join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I would like to propose some agenda adjustments. The main one being to move item 6A, trying to figure out on the new agenda. Basically, move the PDT presentation up to number 5 so that they have to get back to Portland tonight. And then additionally adding item 6B, the Warren article discussion, and action item 7, a superintendent's report, and an action item 6C, the co-curricular nominations, so that the agenda would be as presented here to the board. Is there a second to those changes?
I second.
Is there any discussion? Any further proposed agenda changes? Okay, all those in favor? Next up, we have the minutes for October 2nd. I would motion to approve those as presented. Is there a second?
I second.
Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor? Okay, warrants. We have warrant number 7. I would motion to approve warrant number 7. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Has it been around?
It was circulated, I believe, by email, but yeah, actually, yeah, we signed it by email.
Okay, great.
Okay. Any other discussion on warrant number 7? All those in favor? Okay, next up, public comment. Would anybody like to make a public comment? Seeing none, we will move right into the presentation. And just to briefly set the floor, we have our folks from PDT here. Most of you have met them before. But you will recall we hired them to do a plan for us, and this is basically what they're here to present. Is the plan. This is our big chance to see what they're thinking and ask questions. So they're going to do a presentation, and then really I think the focus tonight is asking questions. But just to remind people of the bigger schedule, we will talk later tonight about trying to schedule a second board meeting at the end of October. One of the major purposes, some of which will be to pick up business that we deferred tonight, but one of the major purposes of which will be to see if we can more tightly scope exactly what we're asking PDT to do in the next phase. The next phase would take us from now until the bond, and would involve much more detailed drawings, more exact cost estimates and things like that. But before they get into that, we want to make sure that we have the scoping right. So we would have a discussion on or about October 30th about scoping. We would have a public meeting like our chili supper, probably on November 13th, replacing our board meeting. And then we would have maybe another board discussion after that, like November 17th. And then we have a board meeting at the end of November where we would be taking a vote on final scoping to pass off to PDT. So just to remind people, that's the basic schedule. We do have a much larger public forum coming up, and we have several more board discussions where we're going to have to get down to hard scoping. So really tonight, the main goal is to hear from PDT and to take advantage of them being here to ask all of our questions and thoughts that we may need to get ourselves organized. And then we have several meetings to kind of talk through and see the scope we want to pass back to PDT for this more detailed next phase. Is that any questions about what we're trying to do tonight or where we're at or our schedule? So With that, we'll turn it over to PDT.
Well, thank you very much for moving us up on the agenda. We appreciate that. My name is Alan Cunningham, principal with PDT Architects in Portland, and I am joined by Kathy Cahill. She's part of our schools team at PDT and will be acting as project manager. Also with me tonight is Lyndon Keck, who's also the leader of our schools design team. So the first thing I'd like to do is do an overview of really recapping where we've been and work to date. And let me just kind of go over the agenda real quick, a little overview, work to date, and then what I'd like to do is move into Asa Adams Elementary School, talk about the existing conditions a little bit, program analysis, and then get into some concept diagrams and cost analysis. Then I'm going to move into the middle school, high school, and I'm going to talk about the existing conditions, program analysis, concept, and cost analysis as well. And then we'd like to talk a little bit briefly about the next steps. As you remember, in November of 2017, we started the study portion of the project. And that really, we had all of our engineers and our consultants spend a good day or two walking the site and developing a list of what we thought were critical priorities, some of the things that we had seen. And we spent time with Brent Fournier collecting all the background material as much as we could. So that sort of provided a basis, if you will, for all what we thought were, I want to say, serious or critical repairs needed to really carry your facilities through the next 5 or 10 years. The second thing we did in January 2018 is we had staff meetings with all of the staff, including faculty, teachers, facilities folks, to really get their input about how the facilities are meeting the educational demands. What are their needs to deliver the kind of education that RSU 26 expects? Then we did we had a couple brainstorming sessions, one with the school board, and we had another one with that was open community forum. And all of these sort of gave us a list of priorities, and it's very interesting that all those priorities fell in alignment with each other, okay? You'll see one of the biggest things was the Performing Arts Center rose to the top of the list, arts education, and followed quickly behind that by cafeterias and kitchens. So we had the priorities, we had our staff meetings. Then what we did starting in February of this year is we developed a space needs analysis, and this really identified the program needs, which Lyndon will talk a little bit about, in terms of how much square footage do we need for the next 10 years based on your enrollment projections. So we were able to then analyze how much square footage you have and what are your needs going forward. And then finally, we were tasked with, okay, given this information, how would you prioritize where we may need to make critical repairs? And you'll see in the bottom, when we get to cost, we're going to have proposed improvements and repairs. And the other one would be program expansion for both facilities. So both, what are the critical things we see in the infrastructure? And two, how do we meet our educational needs for the next 5 or 10 years? So here's the, and I might be going backwards to cover a little ground, but I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page, including your community and the audience. This is the existing site. It's a 42-acre site, and it's bounded by, now I'm going to get the names wrong, Goodrich and, I got to get it right in front of me. Excuse me. Yes. And 42-acre site, 2 schools, Asa Adams Elementary School here in the front, to the right-hand side, the one closest to Main Street, and has 40,400 square feet, I think, single-story building, pre-K through 5. And then the middle school, high school, which is basically 108,800 on multiple floors, including a basement, second floor, multiple additions. And you can see that the property goes to the back of the competition field, comes right down close to here, the municipal building, and has municipal property and playgrounds coming around it. This is, so I'm going to jump right into Asa Adams. We talked about this a little bit before, but it's not unusual that schools are built over a period of time, and they see lots of different additions at different places in time, and they're reflective of what's happening in that place in time, materials that are available, construction, means and methods. So you can see here on Asa Adams, we started in 1956, the red, which was the original building, then 1961, the lighter color, and then finally in 1972. This is a shot coming in looking in the courtyard, bicycles. We're in a covered entry, which is really nice. I'm just going to talk about a few things that we see. Security is a big issue with our schools these days. The location of cameras and how people come in and out, and the visibility from the front office. We'd like to see lots of visibility. You're pretty remote on Asa Adams. When you come into the lobby, you see the greenhouse on the right. Very generous lobby. Classrooms, the pre-K up front, which is somewhat of an issue that the doors are very close to the front entry without checking in. And you can see the administration in the upper right-hand corner, how little visibility there is to the front door other than the camera and the security. One of the things that we know about Asa Adams and the middle school, high schools, like a lot of the mechanical systems have been replaced. They're in pretty good shape. That's the mechanical, that's the heating, that's the ventilation. What is not so good on your schools is the electrical systems and the delivery of the power. New transformer pads and disconnects and major metering needs to be replaced. The transformer vaults out back need to be replaced. The other thing we know is that there are some items that we would recommend further look-see in terms of structural, but it depends on really what we're going to do for additions or what that scope might be. This is the gymnasium, really a multi-use space, and we heard a lot of that in the teacher interviews, how difficult it is to have one space that has so many users. And so you will see that we're recommending new cafeteria and kitchens actually for both projects going forward. The other thing, and this is a typical sort of classroom, and one of the things that we're seeing in the upper right-hand corner is these facilities were built before ADA came along, before the new seismic codes. And so there are a lot of things in there, if we were building a new school, would be different. Having accessible sinks and sink bases inside the classrooms are a key component. So that's sort of a broad picture, I think, on Asa Adams. One of the other things that we see is a lot of original components when the buildings were originally built. The wood siding is not necessarily a good situation. It doesn't have a lot of longevity. It's probably at the end of its useful life. I think the sprinkler system needs to be updated, and there are improvements to the site work as well, site circulation. We'll go through some additions of what our proposed recommendations are moving forward. But before we get there, I'd like to turn it over to Lyndon for just a minute to talk a little bit about the program. And I apologize, you cannot read the spreadsheet from where you are, but it is a summary of the work we went through, and the yellow is highlighted where we have sort of places where we need to add program. So.
Thank you. My name's Lyndon Keck. I'm a senior principal with PDT Architects, and actually, we were hoping you could read that because I wanted to give you a quiz about line item 56. With these, you will have a copy in the final report. You will have copies of the that you can actually read, and we'll also make them available to the public. What we did do, and what we're trying to demonstrate here, is that we did spend a lot of time interviewing staff and analyzing instructional space as well as office space and other teaching space within the schools. And so the spreadsheets are set up so that every room is identified on the left. There's a major column in the middle that shows how many rooms and what the square footage is for the functions that exist presently, both at Asa Adams as well as the middle high school, and then what we recommend for numbers of rooms and the sizes of the rooms for the proposed enrollment, which has been previously determined by a different organization called NESDEC that did enrollment projections for you folks. I'm just going to hit the high spots, and then you folks can ask me questions later. In general, I would say, and Alan didn't really mention it here, but I want to note the age of Asa Adams, because I think Asa Adams looks like a great school. It's got a great look as a drive-by. But I think the public needs to understand that traditionally in the past, what we've done is we've designed our public buildings with a 40-year life cycle. And we don't throw our buildings away after 40 years, but what it says is that they're due for major renovation. And that includes replacement of infrastructure systems, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. So Asa Adams, the first section of Asa Adams that Alan showed you, is 61 years old. The 1961 section is now 56 years old, and the 1972 building is 46 years old. So some of you probably remember voting for those additions in the past, and you think of the building as relatively young and new, but you can see that all the components of Asa Adams are more than 40 years old. So I think the things that we discovered are appropriate for an industrial model school that's more than 40 years old. Second thing I'd say is that these are industrial model schools, which means that when they were built in the 20th century, most of our school buildings were primarily classrooms. And education has evolved over the last 60 or 70 years, and now we need a lot of spaces for specialists. We need small group rooms. Special education didn't really exist back in the 50s and 60s, and it's a huge part of the program now. So when you go through the program, as Alan said, you'll find that there are areas that are yellow, and that those are the major areas that we identified as places that need more square footage. So I'll just briefly tell you and the public what we found. At Asa Adams, it's missing a lot of small spaces for administration, conference, and specialists, social workers that come in, specialists that work in special education. So you're missing a lot of offices. Physical, occupational therapy and physical therapy, those specialists are missing spaces. Testing rooms are missing. Your art room is undersized, and then those storage rooms and kiln rooms that support the art programs are missing. Music storage. In general, when we built buildings in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we really dramatically punished storage and custodial space. And that's what we found at your buildings. There's a real lack of storage and spaces for the custodians and for the facility manager to be able to take care of the buildings. The nurses' spaces are undersized. We found that your kitchens at both schools were half the size that they would be under today's recommendations by the Department of Education. Nurse and the clinics are dramatically undersized. At Asa Adams, your high enrollment at Asa Adams, it was in year 2016, 2017, was 297 students. The enrollment projection shows that in 10 years, and in general, when you're looking at renovating or building new for schools, you do a 10-year lookout to figure out what's the enrollment projection. So 10 years out for PK through 5, that's pre-kindergarten through 5, The enrollment's 313. And when you get a copy of the spreadsheet, you'll see that's the number that we used for the target information number for the program. At the middle school, so at Asa Adams, what that results in is right now there are roughly 25 teaching stations. Teaching stations include classrooms as well as gymnasiums, art rooms, music rooms. And the number of teaching stations goes up by 4. Goes from 25 up to 29 teaching stations. What that does is the program says that at Asa Adams you need an addition of about 13,920 square feet. So almost 14,000 square feet. On the middle school side, Alan hasn't shown the slide yet, I don't think, with the age of the building. You did show the slide? I think so. Not on the middle school. Oh, because we haven't gotten there yet. Okay, so the middle school's even older. I don't have all the years, but keep in mind when Alan shows you that slide, keep in mind the 40-year life cycle for commercial public buildings. And on the middle school, high school side, again, that building, whether it's in the middle school program or the high school program, it's an industrial model school. Most of the emphasis was placed on building classrooms, not spaces for specialists. So here we found that you have some really nice science rooms. I mean, there are parts of your buildings that are very well sized, but there's no prep room for the science department, so that's a missing space. Collaborative workspaces is a big part of 21st century education at both the middle school and the high school level, and so we've shown that on the program. Students are doing much more independent work and working together in small groups. They're not in the classroom doing chalk and talk, just listening to a faculty member lecture them. Art and storage, again, was undersized. Conference rooms were missing and undersized. Teacher workrooms were missing in the facilities, and the nurse clinic was woefully undersized. Cafeteria is about 60% of the size that's recommended by the Department of Education. And again, the kitchen at the high school, middle school is about half the size that it should be using Department of Education guidelines. What we did do is we used Department of Education recommendation for sizes of space, and we also compared that against national best practices. At the middle school, high school, when you go through the program and you look at the missing spaces, what we recommended was 21,322 square feet. 10,000 square feet of that is represented by a performing arts facility. That's something everybody we talked to, whether it was the students, the faculty, public members, everybody talked about the need for performing arts. In the new program, when you look at it, you'll see 10,000 square feet for the performing arts. At the high school, you now have 42 teaching stations, and under the new program, you'll have 43 teaching stations. So you can see at the high school that you've really got enough classrooms, but it's the small spaces that are missing. And it's the performance space, and it's the fact that kitchens are undersized and cafeterias are undersized. But you've got enough classrooms at the middle school, high school. I think I'll stop and let Alan continue with the ASA. Okay, great. And I'll be happy to take questions later.
So, as Lyndon indicated, with this information, we had a target of, okay, here's what we need for program expansion. How might that fit on the site, and how might we go about doing that? And this includes, I'm going to go forward here, a couple site diagrams that we've started to explore to make the circulation in front of Asa Adams, the bus drop-off, the parent drop-off, and the parking work a little bit better, especially getting the buses out of the Goodrich Drive and trying to increase the safety and the flow. Basically, what you're looking at here is the blue represents what you have right now, and the red is representing that approximately 14,000 square feet of program addition. And without my pointer, I was going to say this addition really brings, I think one of the big moves is bringing the administration up front near the drop-off loop right in front, so there's really clear visibility and safety. And I think that's one of the things that is driving some of these diagrams is basically how can we accommodate the program. It's very difficult with a plan like this to do one big addition and say, oh, we're just going to put it all over there because of adjacencies and how it might fit on the site. So basically our approach to Asa Adams is really almost like replacing the missing teeth, if you will, where we have a single loaded corridor on one side, we could add on the other side as appropriate. If we go to the, I'm going to go to the floor plan here, and this is the one that was shown on that site plan. And we've basically mapped all the program on here on this floor plan. And I don't have my pointer, and the folks at home won't be able to see that on the screen. But it involves a number of additions around the plan.
Does this work with the digital screen or not?
No, they won't be able to see it at home. Whoops. So, anyways, I'll continue talking about this diagram if you can hang in there with me. We're pulling administration out to the front with a combined administration, nurse, and teachers area. Oh, thank you. Right here? Okay. All right, that's not gonna,
It doesn't work on.
yeah, it won't work on that. So let's see if I got, all right, so, can I do this? Let me do this, because it really, so, in this diagram right here, this is Asa Adams. So what we're showing on this diagram is replacing, and taking the pre-K rooms up front and turning them into cafeteria. It's also a place for queuing, for students when they get off the buses and drop off, they have some place to go. Administration is expanded with the spaces in the program that we need right at the front entry. So there's clear visibility as well as security and cameraing if you need to have that, but it's a control point. In doing that, we're basically making a little bit of a courtyard here on the inside. And we're doubling, now we have a separate cafeteria and gym, which is one of the priorities that was on the list. It frees up the amount of teaching spaces that you have. It also provides for a new kitchen. And then the rest of these are just infill pieces on the part of the program, trying to get a small stage here that works with the gym, trying to get a connector here that comes through to the music room, so you don't have to go through what was the former gym to get to the music room, providing accessibility to the stage or to a raised platform was another one of our considerations. So it really kind of, this is also a plan that can be phased in. So I'm going to,
Represents new spaces, right?
right, the red represents the new spaces. So now what I'd like to do is I'm going to step backwards because there's another little part that comes into your site analysis, and that is that over the years, and this is not uncommon with a lot of schools, is applied for grants through the National Park Service for parks or for improvements to the site through the National Park Service. It's referred to as 6F. And between the town, between Orono and municipal property and RSU 26, there are these 6F restrictions on open space and recreation, and they just want to be appraised of what's happening. We have met with them, and I think the approach for Asa Adams and small additions might be the right way to go, but that's something that we're going to have to track as we move into concept design. So we did develop another diagram for Asa Adams as well. There's two concept plans. And these are, I want to call these site diagrams. They're really the culmination of the study, but is enough to identify scope and next steps. So given all this information, we have proposed improvements and repairs that we've targeted at $2,897,426, and proposed program expansion, if we take the 14,000 square feet approximately and apply that with construction costs that we are seeing today, we end up with a total project cost of $9,424,000, and that's in 2018 dollars. This is not a full renovation. This is not a complete renovation of Asa Adams. This is needed repairs that are essential, plus the program expansion. And in the case of like where we're doing the connector to the music room, there's obviously renovations that need to take place. So that's sort of the big picture, the big costs. So I think I'm going to go to the middle school, high school, and then we can come back for questions. Is that okay? So here's the middle school, high school. And you can see the original high school was done in 1938. And we consider a building like this, when you look at the application of an educational program to a building of this typology, we call it a closed building. And we refer to it as a closed building because it doesn't have the flexibility that we might have in a school if we were building it today. If we were building a school today, there would be much more flexibility. You can move walls and everything. This is load-bearing masonry, which is hard to make changes. It's built in 1938, so it is pushing 80 years. The second portion of that was done in 1950, then 1953, 1961, 1971, 1981, and most recently the location of the central office in the front. Which is not 2018, yes. Yeah, so even the central office is, it's getting up there. A few moments of truth. One of the things that and this came from the students as well as staff, is how much they really actually, they like the school. They like it feels comfortable. It has character. So we didn't hear a lot of, oh, we got to have a new school. There's a lot of embedded emotion and memories for a facility like this, and it's not uncommon. But there are still things that we know need to be worked on. One of the things with a complex like this is the amount of doors to the outside. There are, on both schools actually, that we're seeing more of a concern for security and access to buildings, around the buildings. And here's the breezeway connector, basically to get us to the music band room. And it's not heated, and it's not substantial by any means. And either needs to be renovated or included in the new design, okay, the new concept design. And it's one of the things that our structural engineers just was afraid to go in when they saw it. So it needs further evaluation. And here again, we have a cafeteria that is really undersized, and a kitchen that's undersized, and a performance space with no access, handicapped access. This is the renovated tech area, which is now the choral room, which is actually kind of nice. It has a higher ceiling than you normally get in a classroom. And here's the band room, which we thought was kind of interesting. The risers are made out of old cafeteria tables, and so that's another, what we do to get by and get creative. This is the library, which was subdividable at one time. The library has a stack system that goes for multiple floors, and the stair and the lift that's configured there is not accessible, doesn't meet accessible requirements. So you don't have equal access to program upstairs or downstairs. So, but it remains to be seen, how we can use that space. Does it make sense to fill in the floor and get new program? Lyndon talked about the program, and I don't know if, I think we've pretty much covered that for right now. about approximately 20,000 square feet, including a performing arts auditorium for 650 students. I just make this note, I don't think Lyndon mentioned it, but with the Department of Education, if you were funding a new school, they would not pay for an entire performing arts auditorium, if you will, for the whole entire student body. They will only cover 1/3. So here again, our site civil folks looked at a couple diagrams to really make a drop-off, a bus drop-off, a parent drop-off, and parking work both for the high school and middle school. One of the things about the middle school, the way it's laid out right now, is you have to go up the steps to get to the office. You have to go up. And there's no way to get there if you're in a wheelchair unless you go into the gym, get into the lift, go up half a level, then get into the elevator. So if you're going from classrooms from one side of the gym to the other, you've got to go into the gym and interrupt other classes that might take place. It also makes it difficult for you to come in the front door of your middle school. So in the concept diagrams that I've generated, I think we've come up with a proposed solution to that. And I am going to show right now, thank you.
And here the red is not additions, right? So you need
Right.
to say.
Okay, so, yep. So, this is the, we don't have the, well, I'm gonna go. Oh, I guess this will be okay. Okay, so, the red didn't come out exactly as I wanted to, but, basically.
Is this your existing one?
Yeah, you could hold that right there. That'd be great, Kathy. Thank you. So in the site diagram that we have, our Goral Palmer has generated with a bus drop-off loop in front, you have a bus drop-off loop, you'd have an entry into the high school, then you have a separate entry into the middle school, okay? And in between those in the front, this is all high school administration, guidance, teachers, all within this zone. This would be converted to the middle school administration, nurses, and guidance as well. So they're very visible to the drop-off and who's coming and going into the schools in one place. Then what we did is we said, okay, so we're quickly getting into concept design here. But what we did is we took the 650-seat auditorium and we backed it up against the existing music cafeteria spaces, and are suggesting that we renovate those spaces as support spaces to the kitchen with a dining commons that faces the student parking lot. So here's the thing with a school with this layout. When you have an event out there, the front door is on the other side. So folks are going to be coming in through this entry to go into the gym and the locker rooms anyway. With this diagram, you can use a new dining commons to be the lobby for an event in the gym. You can close off the rest of the school for a major event for sports or for the Performing Arts Center, and with a new kitchen. So in doing that, it frees up this space over here, which is the old tech wing, which is where we have located the central offices and SPED central offices. And let's see, what are some of the other items that we have on here? We solved the circulation coming around the middle school gym. The middle school gym is oversized. You know, it's fabulous to have two gyms. The middle school gym is oversized. If we were doing a new middle school gym, we could do with less than that. But we think there's room in there to get circulation either on one side or both sides of a ramp, so that if you're in a wheelchair and you want to get to the middle school and to these classrooms and to the elevator, you would have a way to do that without going through the gym proper if somebody's having classes. Let's see here. And then the pink areas are just consolidated, you know, special education, special services. The classrooms are all in blue. We've taken the stage in the former middle school, and we have turned that into makerspace or collaboration spaces on both floors for the middle school. Let's see here. Almost nothing is happening to the gym and the locker rooms. And so a lot of it is just reassigning and consolidation, if you will, and the addition. So I think that's a concept that we can fit it in there. What we'd have to do with the auditorium and the Performing Arts Center is we'd have to extend that parking down towards the tennis courts. And we've included that component into the program expansion, if you will. Let's see here.
May I just
Sure.
pause for a moment and just say, for people who are looking at this in the audience, I've had a chance to look at these over the past week or so, and I know it's hard not to say, but what about this closet or that classroom or this placement of this here or that there? And I've had to work through that myself, and the response I get without fail from our team here is, this is just a draft, this is just an idea, this is just very preliminary to give you thoughts about what could be. So I don't want for people who are listening and watching to try not to look at that kind of granular level at this point, because it's very much a preliminary look. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you made that point too. And we specifically kept it in a sort of a sketch form because it is a works in progress. Okay, there are lots of different moves that we have to make, and but this is one potential way to answer the question of how do we fit an auditorium on the middle school, high school site and make some expansion to the program. As Lyndon pointed out, most of the square footage is related to the arts education, the auditorium, to get that on there. And I think there's very few other places on the site to make that work unless you were to take up athletic facilities or parking or something else to really make that kind of a square footage work. So what we have done is we've taken
Could you actually
Yep.
talk about the athletic fields piece before you get to that? Because it's not represented in the drawings.
Sure. Okay, so we have not done a site diagram like we did with the elementary school, like with Asa Adams yet. But we have included costs in our budget to expand the parking, down to the tennis courts, to provide a new fat track, 8-lane track, grass. And included in that is, let me just get my list here. So we've included a new 8-lane track and grass competition field. We've included a concession building with toilets and storage. We've included regrading, loam, and seed this existing practice field. So basically the scope of the athletic or the fields component is this right here, okay? And we've also included a 500-seat bleachers and press box as part of that as well in the cost. So what needs to happen, next steps, is to really look at that, that site diagram with those components on there and the performing arts in that place. But there's not, other than those two fields, we're not really looking at moving around those other fields. So with the middle school, high school, we're basically looking at approximately 20,000 square feet, including the 600-seat theater and the rest of the spaces. We've also included some necessary renovations to accommodate different moves so that when this concept happens, those can fit in there. We have not, this number does not include renovations for the entire middle school, high school. So the proposed improvements and repairs that we have listed here total $6,489,000, and the proposed program expansion for an auditorium at $9,270,000. Now, does And that's right, that includes the athletic fields. So, in the summary of costs that are in the study, by the way, we have sort of bundled. We bundled some of those numbers separately and totaled them. So you can see the proposed improvements or repairs. You can see the improvements to the site, what we're doing on the site in terms of replacing the asphalt, the parking lots. And you can see the other component of the site work on the middle school, high school, which will be the athletic fields. And then we've totaled up the program expansion as a separate bundle, so you can see how those all fall in place. So that's the big picture. I don't know, Kathy, do you want to talk a little bit about next steps, or we should take some questions? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm gonna hand down for the board, there's a couple copies for the public too, this is just a slightly different chunking of the cost estimates, your same cost estimates, but,
Okay.
chunked up in parts that I think we might wanna talk about.
Yep.
Rachel, yeah, if you wanna just put those on a table where people can get them, thank you.
So do any members of the board have questions?
For the two plans, are the cost estimates for Plan A and Plan B for ASA roughly equivalent?
Yes. At a concept study level, they're roughly equivalent. Basically, we've taken the administration, just rotated it. One, it's parallel to the bus drop-off. One, it's parallel to the covered entry, and we close that covered entry.
But the square footage change is about even.
It's
as well.
about this, until we get further deep dive in, we're very close. We're about the same between those two. About 14,500 square feet, something like that. More questions?
So, just stepping us back, big picture, you know, there's a spectrum from, we could be looking at rebuilding all of our schools, right? Which we would probably only be able to do if we were to get state funding, which there hasn't been any for a while, may or may not be again. I think this board has taken the decision, we're not going down that road. But there's still a question of the middle school, and maybe we just keep that place safe, and then we look at state funding for that in the future. I don't know if you want to just give us your thoughts on renovations versus state-funded projects versus local-funded projects, some of those kinds of issues.
I think Lyndon just met with the Department of Education and asked a little feedback, I think.
Well, I wanted to, I think this is Brian, this is a good time to step back and sort of compare this with what we're not doing and what could be. One of the things we did do is I ran some numbers using the rule of thumb that the Department of Education uses right now. What Alan has shared with you are project costs, not construction costs. So it has another 20% that's been added for engineering, contingency, furnishings, and equipment. So the costs you have are what his estimate are for total project costs. It's a lot of money when you add these two together. It's like $28 million. What would this be if it was brand new buildings? And the Department of Education right now is using a rule of thumb of $400 a square foot project cost for the year 2020. So I ran the numbers on your program, and if you were to embark on a project where you were going to completely rebuild the middle school, the high school, and Asa Adams, that would be a $75 million undertaking. So $28 million is a lot of money, but it's also a lot less than if you were to say, our buildings are older, they've outlived the 40-year life cycle. What if we were to build brand new? That question always gets asked of us when we make these kinds of presentations. Second thing I would say is that if you apply for state money in future cycles, you are not obligated to build new construction, but you can do renovation. And what the state has found is that renovation, doing complete renovation with new heating systems, new plumbing systems, new electrical systems, structural upgrades to meet seismic codes, all new finishes, that what you do is you save on the order of about 15%. So if you were to say, we want to embark on a full renovation project for Asa Adams, the middle school and the high school, you'd be talking more about $65 million. Because there's embedded energy and there are components within the building that you can use. So, although this is expensive as a $28 million project, I wanted to frame it for you so you understand when the board does deliberations, I'm sure those questions are going to come up. What would it mean if we were to build new? Or what would it mean if we were to do complete renovation? What Alan has described here is a program that has been strategic about how to spend money. And it's been focused on what we heard at the public meetings and what we heard from the staff were the most critical issues. So we didn't completely, the numbers that Alan has given you doesn't completely rebuild all of the athletic fields. What it does is it focuses on those portions of the athletic fields that received the most comments and the most support from the people that we talked to. So it was focused on the practice field, the concessions, the new grandstand for the bleachers, the new track, and the new competition field. When you look at the buildings, the numbers that Alan has shared with you are for new additions to make up for the spaces that are missing, as well as a repair project, basically, to take care of the most important components. And those most important components, in our mind, and we've done this with dozens of school systems, are we try to address the building code and public safety issues that are most important to protecting your children. So what we have defined here in these projects are projects that will be ADA compliant for accessibility, for toilets, ramps, elevators, door hardware. We've defined a project which will be fully legal in terms of the sprinkler systems and in terms of the fire codes for firewalls throughout the building. But it is not a full renovation, so I want to be clear with the public and the board that this is not a complete renovation. If you were to spend this $28 million and then go in after it's been completed, you will walk into classrooms that haven't had anything done to them. There won't be new plumbing systems, there won't be new mechanical systems, there won't be new electrical systems. What we're addressing are public safety issues, and we're repairing components that we know and the engineers know have to be addressed. So that's how this is a $28 million project instead of a $75 million project that's being proposed.
Thank you, that's helpful. And this may not be a number you came prepared with, but just from my picking apart the pieces on your estimates, it looks to me like there's 5 or 6 million just in deferred maintenance. And even if we were going to do nothing to the buildings except make them safe, there's just $5 or $6 million just sitting there right there in that.
Yeah, that's pretty typical. We did a study. I did a study 3 years ago for the town of Brunswick, and it resulted in them deciding to build a new elementary school, but they had about $13 million of deferred maintenance and repair projects to do to 2 schools. It was a large middle school and a large elementary school. So what we have seen in your buildings is very typical from what we'll see all around the state for buildings that are this age. I think you can be proud of the fact that your buildings have worked really hard for you. I mean, when you get your buildings to run for you 50, 60, 70, 80 years, you've gotten your money's worth. But it won't run forever. And if you talk to the facility managers and the custodians, they can tell you line item by line item the things that they're struggling with.
One of the things, sorry. the things that surprised me, though it probably should not have surprised me as much, is the site improvement needs with the parking and flow. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because it's a pretty sizable part of this, the dollars that add up, and why that turned out that way.
Yeah, so I'll give you my overview, and then I'm gonna let Alan talk, because he's really done all of the detailed work. He's done much more work than we would typically do at the study stage level. So I've chastised him for losing money, because he's gone way deeper in the weeds than we were really intending to go with this portion of the study. But he's very familiar with all of the detailed components, and I think Alan did the right thing, because this is actually a very complex project. You have lots of different all of your buildings have lots of different ages to them, and they're all in different conditions. And so I think Alan really had to roll up his sleeves and get into all the nitty-gritty kind of component. But one of the things we noticed when we first came on the campus was what we would consider to be relatively unsafe conditions in terms of a mixing of traffic and buses and deliveries. So what we have done is we've prepared site plans that start to separate bus unloading and loading from regular traffic and from parents that are circling through the parking lots trying to drop off kids. As you know, if you don't have the buses in their own protected area, then traffic has to stop when the flashing lights are put on. So what we've tried to do is to set up loading and unloading zones. You also have some dead-end situations with the automobiles, especially up at the high school and the middle school. So we've really tried hard we consider those public safety issues. And as I said, this project has really tried to identify things that we think are important to public safety. And Meredith, those issues on the parking lot and the drives, we think there are certainly elements, if this was a state-supported project, that they would want us to address. So what we've done is we've used the same design templates and criteria that the state of Maine uses when they make recommendations for new schools. We've applied those same rules to your project. Do you want to say a little more about the site?
Sure. I can just talk about what Asa Adams covers in terms of site work, and that is one of the things, I guess two major things on Asa Adams that we heard were really the width of this entry right here for pedestrians coming across and coming up Goodrich, and also the bus drop-off configuration that they're sitting out there in Goodrich. So this plan really necks this down and tries to channel circulation in around, so you have a drop-off loop and sort of reconfigures the parking. One of the things that I asked our consultants, which is Goral Palmer, was what is the condition of the paving, and how long will that last? And they said it's at the end of its useful life right now. It's not draining properly, and so part of that is really getting the right subsurface layers, if you will, so that all works. So what this number includes is all of that paving to be box cut, and by that it means the paving is taken off, it's recycled, they take off the fill underneath, the drainage layer, and they replace that. So you're getting an entire new parking lot here, an entire new parking lot back here, and a new bus drop-off, and a new service configuration to go along with the kitchen. So we did the same thing on the middle school, high school, in that the two diagrams that we have are this existing site. Yeah, we can use this one here. So what we've included here is basically the same thing, but with that new configuration. Oh, thank you.
Oh, it's hard to see up there.
Yeah, that one's hard to see, but it's in your packet, I believe, but there's basically separate bus drop-off loops and parent drop-off loops for the high school and for the middle school. Now, this is a concept diagram, and what needs to be determined, I'm good with that one. I guess what needs to be determined is really how the Performing Arts Center sits in here. Is that the right scope? And what does that mean for the rest of the site? But right now, it's a high school drop-off and visitor parking, a middle school drop-off and visitor parking. Student parking still stays out back. But that way, it's very clear, and you can turn in and go out separately. You're not going into a dead-end situation. So it includes all new parking here, all new paving here. And then with the Performing Arts facility, we included expanding that parking down to the tennis courts. So, does that answer your question, Meredith, on the scope of the?
It does.
So there's clearly some flow improvements, but, so, I mean, Mainers like to use money carefully. What if we just threw down an inch of asphalt on top of the existing structure? What's gonna happen?
Well, I would have to run that by our experts, okay? How much will that inch last us? I think one of the things about having facilities like this is the approach to that, because it's difficult. Sometimes when you invest money, you spend it on things you don't see. It's got to go into infrastructure. One of the things that we heard in the staff and all the meeting notes was how many keys are needed to get around the buildings, okay? Or that, you know, now everybody's got laptops and they got more technology. Where are the outlets? Where's my connectivity? I can't connect. So, you know, I haven't really dug into your operating costs and your capital improvements, and the costs that Brent and RSU 26 is carrying on a year-to-year basis. But it wouldn't surprise me if that's a high number, because there's so many systems, there's so many additions. It's not like you can have one key set or one roofing or one detail. They're all different from every year to the next when you did the additions. So I think from a facility standpoint, it makes it very difficult to manage that. You know, that it comes back to also, I think when we look at the middle school, high school, is the educational flexibility. You hear this word, but being able to reconfigure and have a variety of systems, it's hard to do with masonry walls inside an old building like that without really getting into a lot of costs. So we really trying to be strategic about what these buildings represent and what we can do with them. So.
Well, I thought, Brian, your question was a good segue. Because what we have done for you is fulfilled the terms of a study. We looked at your buildings and we've made a recommendation. It is not ready to go to referendum and raise money, as you have heard us tell you, because there's lots of questions that have to be asked. And there'll be trade-offs and compromises that need to be made. Alan has developed, I think, 2 terrific ways of addressing Asa Adams and the high school, middle school, but there were other choices as well. There was a lot of crumpled up paper on the studio floor when Alan was working, so we know there are alternatives. He can spend hours explaining to you why he chose to put the entries in certain places. But I think that what really happens at the next stage before you go to referendum is what's called concept design, where you question the recommendations of the study and you do more study and more thoroughness on the design work. So when the package finally gets ready to go to referendum, it might say that you would spend half as much money on the site improvements, that maybe you focus your money on safety for bus and parent drop-offs, but that on the parking lots you say, we're just going to cover it with a 1-inch binder course because we don't want to spend money there, because we want to spend more money on the mechanical system or the plumbing system or some other component. There's just hundreds and hundreds of trade-offs and things that have to be looked at. So I guess I think that's, your question's a good question, and I don't know if we put the money in the right place. You might say, gee, I would rather take half of that money that you put in site work and put it towards addressing the plumbing system. So concept design is going to the next level, more detail, looking if there are options, what options were discarded and considered, and why is this design, truth test the design, and have the school board really work with us, or a committee work with us to really fine tune the design and get it so that you think it's the best value for your community,
Mhm.
regardless of what the price tag is.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to remind people, we talked about at the board what that would look like. We tentatively, we would have 4 subcommittees. We have an ASA subcommittee, ASA building, OMS, OHS building subcommittee, a performing arts subcommittee, and a athletic facilities and grounds parking subcommittee. And those subcommittees would each be led by a board member, have community members as part of them, and would walk through this detailed trade-offs and concept, reporting back to the board as the kind of master driver of the trade-offs across the committees, and hone through this concept design. That's the next phase we're talking about, and get to the point where we have a precise plan and a precise cost before we would go to a bond. So that's what that concept design looks like. I also just wanted to remind people, we had a bond worth about $4 million. I think it was 2011. And they keep saying that the mechanicals are in good condition. That's because we replaced the boilers and the some of the air circulation under that bond. So that was done. And the other thing we did is a little bit of patchwork on the roofs, but clearly it was patchwork on the roofs. It was not a whole roof upgrade by any stretch of the imagination. And then we did a little bit of the interior, replaced the lockers and the painting in the high school. So that project, call it big or call it small, but take that project away, we haven't done anything of significance other than just annual maintenance budgets since 1980. So that, when you talk about a 40-year lifespan, we haven't even done a construction renovation except for those small things I just mentioned for 40 years. So that's kind of and so that's why I find it, disappointing or unfortunate that we have $6 million in deferred maintenance, but I don't find it very surprising that we have $6 million in deferred maintenance, because other than that one project in 2011, it's been 40 years, 38 years since we've actually done anything more than just annual upkeep. So that's the context. What other questions would the board like to ask?
A couple of questions come specifically from the list of recommendations that you made for us. Mostly just so I'm clear on, it's recommendation number 2 regarding the revolving renovation funds, and then recommendation 3, which is the major capital improvement funds from the state. And you suggest that we could qualify, a number of things could qualify for the revolving renovation funds, and then maybe the middle school for the major capital improvements project. Just so I'm clear, would that be to cover the cost of some of the things that you recommend here, or would that be to cover the cost of things that are not being proposed to be done here?
We put that in there as a recommendation, and I think we would recommend that to all of our educational clients, that when monies are available through the Department of Education in what's called the revolving renovation funds,
Right.
that you apply for those, and there are different levels for what's included in those revolving renovation funds, going from life safety to access. And Lyndon, I don't know if you have any new news about when funds will be available, but
I understand what the funds are and what they cover. I'm just asking, are they being recommended here, or is that, no?
some of these items would be qualified to be part of that if there were monies available and you qualified, yes.
So,
I think
but we put the recommendation there for future work that is not part of this
Okay.
work. That's the answer to your
Yes,
question.
thank you.
Well, let me clarify.
And both of those programs are very competitive programs. The revolving renovation program is very competitive. It's a maximum of $1 million per building. That can go a long way, but it would, it's to help in the future beyond this project to address things like the recommendation for the middle school for consideration as a major capital improvement project, meaning major renovation of the middle school or a new middle school, We made that recommendation primarily because of the age of the building.
Right.
It's 80 years old. Usually buildings that are 80 years old with a lot of deferred maintenance get to be very competitive near the top of the list.
Right.
Over the last cycle, there were 80 applications, and they're probably going to fund the top 15.
Right.
So the competitiveness is very strong, but an 80-year-old building usually finds its way to the top.
So if, let me ask you this as a follow-up, if the state were to replenish that fund, right, which is
The revolving renovation or
no, the major capital?
the major capital, yeah.
Okay, so if they were to replenish that and open it up for new applications, let's say that they do it sometime next year, just hypothetically, all right, with a new legislature and a new governor in place, they put some funds there and they reopen the process, and we were to apply for that, I mean, obviously we can't tell whether we're gonna get it or not, but if we decided we wanted to do that, how would that affect the recommendations that you have here for us for the middle school portion of this project?
Yeah, so we did spend time thinking about that, and we also had chatted with Meredith and Brent and Brian about that as well. So I can tell you this. It's not a fund that gets replenished by the legislature, but what the history is that the state of Maine, the State Board of Education, puts out a call for major capital improvement projects, usually every 4 or 5 years. This last cycle, it was 6 years. But that's the rule of thumb. So they just did a call a year ago. And so you're probably 4 or 5 years away. So you should put that on your calendar. It's going to be at least 4 years, I think, before there's another call for major capital improvement plan projects. And I forgot what the other thing was that I was going to say.
So what's the calendar look like from, we
Oh,
apply in 5 years?
thank you, that's what it was. So let's say you do put in an application in 4 years. It takes a year for them to evaluate those applications, and then another year for them to start the program. So now we're out 6 years. You will get taken wherever you are on the list. If you're number 1 through 4, you'll go in the first year. If you're, number 5 through 8, you'll go in the second, and so on like that. So you could find yourself waiting 3 or 4 more years. So now we're 8 years out. The planning process with the state is usually a 2 to 3 year process. So now we're at 11, and you're going to have a referendum, and then you're going to take 2 years to build that. So 11, 12, 13. You could, even if you put in an application, you might not see the results of a fully renovated middle school for 12 to 15 years if you score in the top.
Okay.
You may not score in the top. We've worked with clients. We're doing in Mount Ararat High School right now, and they had to put their application in 4 times. Now, theirs was not an 80-year-old building, but they waited a long time to get on the list, and we're working with a client now that was the last one on the list, Sumner Memorial High School, down in Ellsworth area. And so they waited 5 years. They waited 5 years before they were told, okay, now you can go. And the way the funding works is that the state is constantly doing public schools as well as other public buildings, and there's the state has limits on indebtedness. They can sell bonds. And so some schools, some new construction from 20 years ago is rolling off that indebtedness, right? And it frees up more opportunity for the state to sell another 50, 60, $80 million worth of bonds.
Okay, great, thank you.
So if I could just clarify, my understanding is the only improvements, I mean, if you look at the diagram, there's no real changes. So the improvements in the middle school are of the nature of the load-bearing walls that are cracking or electrical panels, or things that Goro Palmer says needs to be done in the next 5 years for safety reasons, regardless
Things
if
that
we're going to have students in the building.
Things that our engineers have recommended are what we've referred to them in the report as essential items, meaning that we think they're critical repair items that you would want to do. If you don't do them now as part of a $28 million bond issue, you should plan on doing it as out of your operating budget as deferred maintenance items over the next 10 or 12 years.
And Lyndon, correct me if I'm wrong, but typically those kinds of life safety upgrades that you make to a building, they don't necessarily hurt you when you put in an application for major capital funding.
Yeah, that's
It's
not
sorta
true. There's,
Sorta true.
you're right. So what Kathy's referring to is if you had put in an application for the middle school, if you had done that in this last round, and you were not funded, there's a hold harmless component to the application process, where if you're gonna go ahead and make repairs and make improvements, the state doesn't, they will score your project as if you had not made those improvements. It's called a hold harmless. You're not eligible for that because you don't have it, you didn't put an application in the last round. So to Kathy's point, if you do spend money on the middle school, making improvements, and the state comes through and scores the building, and if you've improved the handicap components, you won't, it's a scoring system, so you won't get any points for having a building that has poor accessibility.
So anything we do before we get the application in counts against us? Or lessens our chance?
It lessens your chance. So you don't want to do a lot of cosmetic, unnecessary things. You want to be strategic about how you spend your money. You're not the only school system that wrestles with this problem, because you don't want your buildings falling down. You don't want your buildings to be unsafe. So typically what school departments and school boards do is they are strategic about where they spend the money, and they say, we want to make sure, priority number one is to make sure our kids are safe. And they'll spend money in those areas.
And we're just doing the top-ranked items from the engineering firm.
Right. The reports, I think, are in the study,
Yeah.
and I asked them to prioritize the top 5 or 6 items, and you can see what they prioritized.
Could you walk us through, I mean, we have it in front of us, and I've certainly looked at it, but the 8 recommendations, don't need to read it because we have it in front of us, but maybe just do a bullet point highlight of what the 8 actual recommendations are.
Our final recommendations.
Yeah, the executive summary, you have 8 bullet points in the recommendations.
Okay.
There's not a page number, but it's near the front. It's towards the end of the executive summary section.
And we have copies for facilities committee members and administrators and board members, but if you're a member of the public here, we have a few extra if you want to grab one. If you'll just return it to Brent when you're done, if you want to grab a copy just to preview.
Alan, while you're looking that up, can I just ask a quick question? With this money that's like, if we put into this new school fund, is that always a new school, or is that sometimes a huge renovation too? I just wanted to clarify. I thought that was said earlier, but.
Yeah, what happens if you're on the list, then the state says we will participate with you financially on improving your middle school. They have you do 2 studies. The first study is what's called new versus renovation, and then you present the results to them. And at that time, if you say, we really love the building, we like the way it looks, we like a lot of the character of the building, as much as possible we'd like to save the building and renovate the building, the state will work with you on that and they'll listen to you. So it's not automatically demolish the building and go build a new building.
Okay, so Brian, to answer your question, or to just kind of go over some of our recommendations, I think our first priority and what we asked our consultants to do is to prioritize all the things that we saw in our observations for serious things that need to be replaced. That's item 1. That would be anything that really deals with safety. For instance, we know, here's an example, the sprinkler heads are at the end of their useful life. They need to be replaced after 50 years, okay? That's top, so that needs to be done. Along with that, I know some of the sprinkler systems, you've moved around spaces, or mechanical, or this or that. The coverage on those needs to be verified. That's a safety thing. So we would, and we have a list of that, but those are essential, serious items. It's like the electrical service. You have new mechanical systems for the most part, but the electrical service, in terms of the service to the buildings needs to be replaced. So those are what I call serious repairs. Another serious repair are the lintels on the old high school, now the middle school, that are spalling off, and that you repair on a continual basis, and will continue to do that as long as that building is there. That's a safety concern. You got things coming down on your head, okay? So let's see here.
Another big
yep.
piece of that was the siding on ASA.
Oh, the siding on ASA. You know, that's right in there. It's T111. It's vertical wood siding. And, you know, one of the things that we really haven't talked about is the longevity of the buildings. When they were built, these buildings have little to no insulation. You know, there's been some improvements, but they've been after the fact, and it's very difficult to make those efficient. So we haven't included monies for what we call a deep energy retrofit, which would mean re-insulating the whole ASA Adams and try to get it into a high performance category. So we're basically, our number here is for replacing the siding. Comes down to the ground, snow builds up against it, water gets up against it, it's rotting. You can see that from some of the photos. Those, I think, are serious repairs at ASA Adams. At the middle school, high school, I think more of the serious repairs are continuing to replace the roof membrane and complete that, because there's a lot of leaks that are happening. And there's, because of the additions we put in our study, we recommended some more structural analysis, because you're shoveling snow off your roofs, and climate change has made some wild storms here, or wherever that's coming from. We got some wild storms. You get a lot of snow, and our structural engineer said, geez, somebody ought to go through these and take a look at it and make sure, because I think these buildings were built so far, the codes have changed. So I think those are what I would classify as serious items. Our second recommendation is to apply for revolving renovation monies when they become available and the call is out. So like Lyndon had mentioned, we're not really sure when that's going to happen, but that would certainly be a strategy for renovations. And it was just like number 3, major capital improvement application. I think, as Lyndon had mentioned, the age, you know, the old the high school there, 80 years old. I mean, it's there. It's kind of fragile, and getting in there, when we go in and we do additions, when we do work with the old additions, it's just so difficult, and they've reached the end of their life. The fourth one is to really take a phased improvement process. RSU 26 should implement phased improvements over the next 3 years to improve site safety related to bus, car, pedestrian circulation at the schools. This would include new bus drop-off, parent drop-off, and visitor parking. Because you have a campus configuration and all the circulation is kind of tied together, it needs to be thought of in a phased way. I think that's actually nice that you can work it in and not have a total disruption, but that could be phased in. After all of the notes and everything and talking to everyone, the arts education and athletics, about arts education, the auditorium frees up a lot of space within the building, okay? And it really makes a dedicated space for the arts, which we heard over and over again, and I think the results of the forums speak to that. But I think when you do that, you free up all this other space that then becomes available for other parts of the program that are missing. And then let's see here, item number 6 is the athletic fields. You know, we're not doing the entire site, but that chunk of the fields, your competition field and that practice field, that's the scope that I think would probably have the most impact, and I think what folks are responding to. The 7th one is considering a new cafeteria and kitchen. They're undersized, and here again, by providing a separate cafeteria, it frees up a lot of space, and it accomplishes a number of things. In Asa Adams, if you were to make those changes and get the cafeteria up front, you all of a sudden have a place where all the busing and all the kids could come in inclement weather, going and coming from the school, and also get the administration where it has clear visibility. On the middle school, high school, that same cafeteria kitchen could serve the athletic, the gym, if you will, and a lobby, as well as the Performing Arts Center, as well as the school. And then our final recommendation, and that is the final recommendation I had on this list, is the cafeterias and the kitchen. So those are the biggies. Those are the big, our big,
Great,
big
thank
items.
you.
I would make one final comment in the study, and what is not in there is we have not included a description of what we're seeing for energy costs and what you're carrying for energy costs, and just as a benchmark. And it's no surprise that you're probably paying twice what we would see in new buildings if you were to do a new building. Okay, we look at what's called the energy use intensity, which is a site cost, and our new schools can really do well. So in doing a Performing Arts Center in a new facility, it'll be a high performance facility, and we could do really well there. So
Great. It seems like the board is tapering off on questions. I'd just like to ask if anybody in the audience or any of the administrators or anybody else has any questions they would like to ask while we have the architects here. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
One thing, you've already spoken to this, about snow removal and sort of weather security and things like that. One thing that we've talked about as a board and a facilities committee is the state of the roofs. It would be real helpful for me at some point to see a schematic of how the roof lines would change or remain the same. If you look at the roofs in March, you can see there's ice sheets on some parts and snowbanks on other parts, and it'd be nice to see how that is alleviated in the plan. So if there's a way we can imagine that, that would be helpful for me.
Yeah, Asa Adams, all your roofs are very difficult, okay? They were done with multiple additions. And so, there's, what we need to be careful of is when we do the additions, that we're not impacting the other roofs, okay? That we have to go back and deconstruct, which often happens. When we do an addition, it causes drifting on an older portion, and then we have to bring up the structure, okay? So I'm glad you mentioned that, but that's something we really have to pay attention to as we go into concept design. How will that really fit with roofs? And can we make that work in a minimal fashion? It may be a lot of the places that I have targeted on these plans, we'll have to rearrange those, put it somewhere else, because we don't want to impact the existing roofs. But we try to do the best job we can there.
I think one of the recommendations is for a more extensive study on the roof systems. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Probably generate just what you're asking about, Jeff, because I think in terms of, as Lyndon said, the scope of the study is not that as in-depth as it needs to be on the roof. Ultimately, that was like the discovery that we need to do further study into the roof.
Yeah.
With a
right. The codes have
part of
changed.
the recommendation.
Right.
So.
The codes have changed, and the construction technologies with all the additions. There's enough different things happening that our structural engineers recommended that, gee, we got the existing drawings, but we need to really go up above the ceilings and really see it ourselves. So there's some more investigation that has to, they're recommending, but we put it in there as a placeholder in the budget so that once we get into concept design, to get into the existing and do that analysis, we can do that at that point.
There's, I think we need to consider as a board, or I'd like to know as a board, this may be a Brent question rather than a PDT question, is how do we project maintenance staffing levels for an increased site plan, and what does that look like, and how do we fit that into our budget? Be interested to have that discussion at some point.
Yeah, in general, cost implications, energy, and all all those operating costs. Yeah, I imagine that would be part of, at least in some degree, in the concept design. So really, this is, the goal of this plan is to get us talking and to help us set a scope. And then once we set a scope, we'll pay these guys to work with us for the next 6 months or whatever it is, a little bit longer, and really hash out all the details. So that's kind of we're at a transition point between those two phases right now. But other things that are in the concept design. So there is a recommendation to specifically have engineers look at all of our roofs. Some more hazardous material checks to make sure that there's no gotchas hiding there. Ground and soil studies to make sure that, if we put a parking lot in front of the high school, that we can support that there. So a number of these kinds of belt and suspender checks are part of the next phase.
I have one more clarification question. In this report, and you guys have talked about, you said like you're a 2-school campus, and we've been talking a lot about this 2-school, the Orono Middle School and the high school together. But when the state looks at it, we've been saying just the middle school could get a renovation. Would they consider that its own separate building, even though it's connected? That wouldn't be a...
Yeah, we asked them that question, and they said that, the Department of Ed, that we could submit an application for a middle school at some point. That could be part of the complex. Yeah.
Does anybody in the audience want to ask a question?
Could you just list those items that are included in the 20% project cost again?
Sure. Usually, when there's three parts to a budget. The first item is construction, and then the second component is fees and services. That will include, architect fees, geotech, and then there are administration fees. That'll include testing, on-site testing, approvals, DEP. You've got, geotech that's in there, test pits, borings. If we have to do any more hazmat studies or analysis or anything, that's in there. But typically, the construction costs have a 20% markup between construction and project. And, that's all variable depending upon, the size of the project and the complexity and all of those things. So it's all of the what we call soft costs, testing, fees.
So things like furnishings,
Furnishings would be part of that. So that cost represents an entire complete project with new furnishings, new equipment. Fully equipped auditorium. Yeah. Will not include a fly loft, but it will include a state-of-the-art auditorium, with, a good sound package and chairs. Yeah.
Alan, early in the presentation, Alan had made reference to if this was a state-funded project, that they would not participate to the full extent of an auditorium, and I just wanted to elaborate on that. I think he had said 1/3 of the student body. What the state does do, if you were building a new high school, let's say and so your high school students are around 400 students, 441, I think, is what your target's going to be. So what they would do is they would build you an auditorium for 1/3 of that number of 441, which is what, 138, 140, something like that, which is a really tiny auditorium. So you might say, well, how do all these other communities get these 600, 800, 900 seat auditoriums? They do it with local funding. That's how this is all done. The state really puts in some seed money for a stage and for enough seats for 1/3 of the high school students. And then if people want a 600 or an 800 seat auditorium, they do that with local money. So I just wanted you, if you wanted to use the state formula, you're gonna build a auditorium of 600 seats that Alan's carried, but you would be doing an auditorium with 150 seats, 138 seats.
And we asked that PDT put in an auditorium that basically was comparable to Hawk Auditorium, or, you know, a little larger, slightly larger than that. So that's why we asked, that's why the 600-seat auditorium.
Yeah, and that might be one of the things that, as you go into concept design, you say, maybe that's a little too big. Maybe we overshot the mark. Maybe we want to do an auditorium with 400 seats. Or maybe you say, we want to make it bigger. I don't know. But that's one of the things that would be, I think you would want to review and say, have we got the right size? Alan has a 3,000 square foot stage in that right now, which is a really big stage. It's beautiful. It's ideal. But we've done high school stages that are 1,500 or 2,000 square feet, which is not as ideal. So I think it's going to have to do with what are we going to do on the stage? How often are we going to use the stage? Do we have an orchestra program? Do we do musicals? Are we going to have dance? That helps determine what the size of the stage is. So one of those committees that I think Brian had talked about is going to be set up to work on those kinds of questions.
Any other questions from the floor? Okay. So board, we need to, this is where the rubber hits the road. We need to start looking seriously at the scope and get realistic about scope, because we don't want to enter a concept design where we're, you know, way off base on scope. We're going to be tweaking and trading off, but we don't want to come in with a scope of 30 million if we're only serious about 15 million, or vice versa. So I handed you guys, this is my own summary. The numbers tie to the penny with what PDT provided, but just kind of chunking things up. So the improvements, probably a better word is infrastructure or deferred maintenance, right? But you can see we've got 4 million of that sitting there. The parking, if you combine it across ASA and the two components at OMS and OHS, come up to about 4.5 million. Certainly those two numbers, so that's 10 million right there. Those were numbers all of us had rounded off to 1 million or two in our wishful thinking. So that's a lot of where the story is coming from. And then, you know, the cafeteria pieces are those are the big new exciting things, and the athletic facilities, and you can see the cost there. And you've seen this table before about bond implications. Nothing set in stone about where that scope is, but by the time we get to the end of November, we need to have had some pretty hard conversations about what the scope we think is realistic. And we'll have a public forum at one point to help us with that, but we have 2 or 3 board meetings to get through to the scope, and I think it's pretty obvious this number is higher than any of us were hoping, and if you look at that straight through into the taxes, that's a pretty high number. But I also, it's not like there's a bunch of things. Personally, I could let go of the LED lights, for example, but it's not like there's a bunch of things. We're starting with 10 million of really basic safety. And so I think we're going to have to be good New Englanders and sharpen our pencils and find some creative financing and deferring some projects until after the other bond comes off the books, and figuring out what we can do through annual maintenance and what we're going to have to do through a bond, and, you know, look at maybe if we can defer a couple things till we can get the revolving renovation funds, maybe get a couple million out. Anyway, I think we have a lot of work ahead of us to see how we can get what we think is a reasonable tax number, and what we think the schools really need to come together. I don't know if we have 3 more meetings to talk about this, but I don't know if there are any other first impressions people want to share.
Number is in fact much bigger than I thought it was going to be. I was in my head thinking somewhere in the 10 to 15 range, and we're in at double that. Yep. So it's pretty big.
Yes, it is.
And I think one of the pieces ahead of us that will help us further consider this is the November 13th public forum. We're going to do that in the middle school auditorium and try to have a large gathering of community members to hear from PDT this presentation in a more of a public kind of consumption level, with drawings and some handouts to kind of summarize everything and really try to get feedback from the community once more now seeing this information, because as I think we all had a tendency to do this of, we wanted to prioritize the things that are exciting in the study when we were looking at it, but it's really compelling when you hear about some of the structural and electrical issues we have that really have to be considered for life safety and over the next 5 years. So I think getting the public's reaction to all of that and the larger context of the whole study will be an important part of the listening that we need to do to come back to a decision 3 meetings from now about what we see as project scope. So that'll be a really important time for us, I think. So people listening tonight, please come to the meeting on November 13th, because there's going to be a lot more dialogue and interaction with the information than you probably were able to gather tonight from this presentation that was just a first pass at the report. So I think that's important to think about too.
Any other thoughts from the board, or for that matter, from the floor? Anybody else want to chip in? Be happy to hear. We're going to be doing more listening, but I'd be happy to hear from the public tonight too. All right, I think, so last chance. I mean, Meredith can funnel questions to PDT over the next month, but last chance to ask them in person. Anybody else have a question? All right, I think we're good. I know they have, oh, Lori.
As you know, I think that energy efficiency is a really great investment because it lowers the cost of heating the buildings, and we have 6 months of the year, it's pretty cold, and we need this plenty of the heat. So I'd be interested just as seeing what's the big picture on what the roof needs are. I'd also be interested in seeing what suggestions they might have if we keep, the plan seems to be to keep the old buildings, maybe upgrade. Yes, it's hard to upgrade old buildings, but if you can weigh out how much that would save fuel costs, then when you're going to put a bond out to upgrade the buildings, this would be as much as you can.
Mm-hmm.
Wall and have it ceiling installation.
So a point about energy efficiency, and indeed, oftentimes you can find things that pay back in 3 to 5 years, and it's kind of hard to say no to those things. So maybe that's a conversation we can have with PDT about how much we want to, how much scope of energy efficiency we want to do during the concept design. But that's something we should take into consideration and scope that out right during concept design as well, recognizing that it'll cost money to do it. But yep.
How will you notify the public about the meeting?
Well, we were told the banner that we got put up for the last one was the one and only time we were able to do the banner, so not through a banner. The banner.
Or in town?
Yeah, it was right out here.
It's across Main Street.
It was just a favor they did us one time. They said, we really can't do this again. It wasn't the town that said that. Yeah. So we will put flyers around town, do Facebook, ask the town to put it on their Facebook as well, try to send it out through the media and word of mouth. So I think the banner was a great visual last year. So the town's always really nice to put things on the sign for us as well, right out here. And so we hope to have a good cross-section of the community.
I don't do Facebook, and
Yeah.
everybody says, oh, it's going to be on Facebook. And it's like, yay, big deal.
Well, if you had some suggestions for other ways, I'd really love to hear this, yeah.
I think the paper,
Yeah.
I think the newspaper is.
Paid advertisement.
Yeah.
To expect it to come home to the schools,
Right,
have things come home.
right,
Right.
yeah,
We definitely want to reach outside the parent community.
right,
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
Expect it to come through the schools, I think is not sufficient.
Right.
No, that's
absolutely.
not the intention. We definitely want to reach out to the whole community because they're going to be voting on it and honestly, frankly, paying for it at some point. So we want to get the whole community involved, and it's Yeah, the sign out front and like the Penobscot Times and maybe paying for something in the Bangor Daily are probably the things I can think of. But if you have other suggestions, we'd love to hear them,
Yeah, we put flyers around town, not just at the schools. We,
like at the library.
so,
You're too late for the Orono Observer, obviously, that comes out periodically.
quarterly, right, yeah,
But that goes to every household.
right.
Yeah.
Large poster at the election?
Yeah, I tabled at the last election. I could think about tabling again at this election. Or, yep.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Any other feedback? We should let PDT get on their way home because I know they have a long drive. Thank you. That's very helpful. Lots of detail, lot to chew on, lots of nice visuals. The numbers, whether we like them or not, they're at least the numbers that are real. We believe in real numbers here. Is the board good to go, or do we need a quick break? Good to go? Okay, next item up is proposed meeting dates. As you just heard, we have a lot of work to do. So Meredith put out a poll on meeting dates. The current plan is that we need to add a date at the end of October, partly to pick up business that we didn't do tonight, and partly to have some time to start the discussion process, do any scoping planning before the public meeting. Looks like Monday the 29th or
Well, Jeff has weighed in since then, and looks like Tuesday the 30th is now clear, front runner.
Okay. So Tuesday, the 30th was okay with everybody? Is that still okay with everybody? Okay, and it looks like in November, we have some flexibility. This is probably gonna be a workshop. This is gonna be it's not the final meeting, because we're gonna vote at the meeting after Thanksgiving week. But this is probably gonna be the meeting where we really get down to brass tacks about how do we, get the tax dollars we like of 0 and the proposed bill of 28 million to come together. So that could be a lengthy meeting. This is the week before Thanksgiving. Looks like, Jeff, did you have any additional input on this one?
Did. So it looks like either night at 7 works best for everyone.
Okay.
We could do either night at 7.
Anybody have a preference between the 14th or 15th?
I would prefer the 14th myself.
For,
I can't do the 15th. I know I filled out that Google form. I don't know, I didn't.
Yeah, you're on the one, but not the other. So you can't do the 15th?
I can't do the 15th.
Well, there we go.
all right, so I would make a motion to add 2 board meetings to the schedule. A Tuesday, the 30th board meeting at 6 PM here in the Town Council chambers, and a November 14th at 7 PM board meeting. It'll be a board workshop, but probably still, assuming it's available, also here in the Town Council chambers. We'll have to verify locations, so actually, let me scratch that from the motion. But board meeting at 6 PM on Tuesday, the 30th of October, and at 7 PM on Wednesday, the 14th of November. Is there a second for that?
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, so be it.
And then just so, for the public forum on the 13th, that's gonna be located where?
We're going to have the public forum on the 13th in the Orno Middle School gym, because we needed a space bigger than this and everything else is tied up. And we used that last time. It seemed to work okay.
So that's obviously in place of our regular board meeting. Yep. Okay,
Can we clarify, on the 14th, did we say 6 or 7?
7 PM. Yep. Next up, we have a warrant article. We don't know the exact scope yet, but we need to pay for the concept design phase, and we discussed this at the last meeting. So this does require a town meeting, and the town meeting would be advertised and held at that November 13th meeting. So I will make a motion. I move that the vote entitled "Vote to Call and Approve of the Warrant to Call Regional School Unit Meeting to be approved in the form presented to this meeting and that a copy of said vote be included with the minutes of this meeting. And the motion is vote to call and approve the warrant to call regional school unit meeting, voted that the warrant to call regional school unit meeting presented to the meeting be approved, and that a regional school unit meeting be called for November 13th, 2018, for the purpose of voting on the capital reserve expenditure approval. And you all, so that's the motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, and you all have in front of you, I don't think I have to read this. Is that right, Lynn?
Well, just the article is kind of important, the language of that article. We need to,
Right, we do need to confirm. All right.
yeah.
So this is included by writing, but, well, I'll read it. So Article 1, shall the school board be authorized to expend funds in any budget year from the capital reserve fund for the purpose of the continuation of the facility study or the implementation of recommendations from the study? So we have the, what is it, 380,000? 244,000. In the, we had a set aside for 440,000 when we disbanded from the RSU. It's gone towards tennis courts. It's gone towards the current facilities study that we saw. But the remaining, this authorizes us to spend the remaining funds either on additional study or on implementation or recommendations. So if the full study, doesn't use up the amount, which at the moment it's not expected to, it would allow us to also spend it on actual building improvements that come out of the study. And this doesn't all have to be done in this fiscal year. That's why it's worded this way. Any other discussion on the warrant?
So just to be clear myself, this is money that we already have in an account, and it's a portion, we're not raising new funds for this.
Correct. It's a
Yeah.
designated fund. It's sitting in a bank account. It can only be used for facilities, and it can only be used, we can only take money, we put money in through a warrant of a town vote, and we can only take money out through the warrant of a town vote.
Thank
you. Yep. So this is not new money or additional taxes. Yep.
And so this doesn't require a vote of the entire town at an election. It just requires a town meeting vote to approve this.
So we're basically authorizing to call a town meeting for our November 13th meeting, and we're authorizing to present, we'll have to sign this before we're done tonight, we're authorizing to present to the town this warrant article that will let us basically draw down the rest of the reserve, facilities reserve. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor? And we will need to sign the warrant articles, so, all right, we can wait and do that at the end of the meeting, but if somebody has to leave early.
And Lynn's saying you have to sign on the same line every time. Remember that?
Right, we have to sign 5 copies, I think, so.
So for that evening, Lynn and I were talking, we need to have a moderator. We've used a couple in the past. We were just gonna check with both of them to see who's available and who might already if there's someone already coming to that meeting and they are willing to serve as the moderator, is it okay with you that we can have some flexibility between those 2 individuals that we've used in the past? Okay.
I was just thinking out loud, is there any concern that one of those moderators potentially was on the facilities committee? Is that gonna be perceived as a conflict of interest? It doesn't seem it to me, but I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so we're good. All right, next up, I would motion to approve Jane Bowler for the OMS drama assistant. Is there a second?
I second.
Any discussion on that? So this is that an existing stipend, or is that a new?
It's an existing one.
Okay,
It just wasn't, we couldn't get anyone to fill it until.
all right. Well, Jane would be great, so.
she will.
Any other discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Next up, we have, this was added at the last minute. We were trying to avoid reports, but there's one thing that we thought it was important for Meredith to update you on, so we added a superintendent's report.
Yes, I just really wanted to kind of get the pulse of the board on this topic. I was contacted a couple of weeks back by Sophie Wilson to get our thoughts on a proposal that had been asked of the town by a group in the community who is interested in installing what's called a pump track on town property adjacent to the hockey rink. And because it's adjacent also to school property, Sophie was calling to just get our thoughts on that and if we had any feedback for them for their deliberations around that. So first of all, I have to confess I did not know what a pump track is. So I will just explain that for the benefit of everyone so we're all on the same page. It's a biking course that has lots of inclines and hills that basically you can use just kind of momentum to move yourself around the track. It's not really a BMX track, but if you looked at it, you might think that. But it's popular in the mountain biking kind of pursuits. And so this group is just appealing to the town to be able to construct one that they would cover the cost mostly and maintain. And so the town asked us our thoughts on it. And so I've done my initial thought and the thought of administrators was really around kind of security considerations and who would be coming to this this facility or this track, mainly during school hours, and would that have any consideration that we would maybe have a safety concern? And really, the only comparison we have is the hockey rink that's there now. And so I think one approach or one response we have is it's difficult to access that area of town property without coming across school grounds. And so that's just a bit of a safety concern. I think that the community group really feels like the people that would be attracted to that kind of offering would not be groups that we would be having issues with. We don't really have issues with people at the hockey rink right now. People do access it some. It's not a big attraction, but we don't have issues with it. We haven't. The other side of this is I talked with some of our physical education staff who have kind of some programmatic interest in having that there. We do have bikes that are used for some units in the middle and high school, and they confirmed they'd be really excited to have that there. That would really help augment their physical education program around the biking units they have. So there is that benefit. There's a whole lot more to this that really is the background of why they're wanting this in the community. There's just a lot of interest in this. They see it as a positive space for anyone of any age who's interested in biking to have an area to use this. There are some really neat videos. Several middle schools around the state have pump tracks built right next to them. So I've looked at a couple of those that they passed along to me. So there's really just mixed feelings we have about it. We see pros, we see cons in terms of location and then in terms of programmatic enhancements. So I just wanted to, before I offered feedback, and basically that is my feedback, that I see benefits and I see some concerns. And the bottom line, it's town land. It's 6F regulated, although this would probably be an enhancement of the 6F offerings in the eyes of that whole aspect. I wanted to see if the board had any feedback before I kind of gave final feedback to the town about this. Sorry, I know that's a lot just to take in and think about.
So I actually was aware of what a pump track was and have admittedly used one in poor fashion before. There's actually one on university property back up in the woods. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but in my understanding with that community is most people who would use it are going to be in school during the day anyways. There's not a lot of people outside of, high school kids doing that kind of thing. So I don't think it's something we have to worry about, people were not familiar with or for security reasons, coming onto campus. I honestly think it'll be like a hockey rink, which is dead during the day and used in the evening, but.
I'm honestly a little surprised. I thought the idea of putting it by the rink was already been kind of moved beyond and that they were looking at a different location. So I'm kind of a little surprised that this is coming to us. We've got a pretty serious parking problem as it is, and maybe there won't be a lot of people using it, but I think there'll be more people using it than use the rink, to be honest with you. Some of them obviously won't be driving here with bikes, but I think some will be. And I mean, tonight was a little bit unusual, but pretty much any night when sports seasons are going on outside, you drive back behind the high school and middle school, there's no place to park. So there's a parking concern. I do think, in my opinion, there's a safety concern. I do see the benefit that could accrue to our PE programs for having it there. That's about the only benefit I see. So, I mean, I guess I share your mixed views. I'm more on the negative side of that than the positive side, but it's my take.
Okay, now I totally do know what a pump track is. I've used them before. I don't know. I had a moment. The parking might be an issue. The other issue is if people don't, if they're actually planning to ride to it, we might want we want to maybe try to get a trail incorporated over to it, because otherwise they're going to be riding across, the soccer fields or something like that. That's how we would get to it. So there are some concerns, but I think it would be, I would be positive because I would like to use it. But yeah, it's again, it's got both sides.
Just to answer your kind of wondering about the location and had they talked about it somewhere else, I think there is a plan in the works for the redesign, renovation of Marden Park to include a more permanent track in that, a pump track in that location. And this is more of a dirt-built track that would be more of an interim. And they said, if it doesn't work out, the great thing about it is you can just flatten it out and it's gone. So I think the Marden Park pump track is a ways down the road. And this is kind of an easier thing to erect pretty quickly, they said.
Do you know where is I know the hockey rink, but is it in the area that's been cleared beside the hockey rink?
Yeah, I think this side of Brent's not here. I think this side of the hockey rink. Does that sound right?
So in like the tall grass to the right of the rink, like at the top of the hill?
Yeah, behind the launching point.
I would assume it's where all that stuff's been cleared out and cut down.
Yeah.
So. I hadn't even thought about the concern Aaron raised, but if people do come here on bikes, all right, that's a good point. They're not taking up a parking spot. We don't want a bunch of people biking across the soccer fields either. I don't think Mike would like that.
Have some sort of set, like a clear path that people knew, oh, this is how I should get there.
Yeah, that would be my main feedback. I think, I could see pros and cons, and ultimately it is town property, so it's the town decision. I would like to be clear that the town owns the decision, and they own the insurance on this as well. And for people who don't know, the middle school, high school already has bikes, so they could actually use this in the PE program. But my main concern is that the town is proactive in access to it, and that people are not thinking that they bike up Woodridge and through our parking lot in the middle of a school day. And also the scenario that I can see that's the worst is they bike, through the asphalt to the north of ASA, right, going up right outside the 5th grade wing and the 4th grade wing's windows on bikes, probably, hopefully not being wild and excessively loud, but even talking to each other, driving right by there on school hours. And
kids are playing out there during the day.
Yeah, biking through during a recess.
I understand that, but I don't know how access is going to be a huge issue, because you have to either cut through private property maybe to get there, that's no good. Cut through school property to get there, which is no good, at least during the school day or even after school if you've got activities going on. There's enough concern in that parking lot back there right now without adding a bunch of bikes going through during after school time. Or the third option, which is really the only one that utilizes town property, is, as you said, going up the hill. And there's issues there too.
Yeah, if they go up the hill, I would certainly want to see a sign trail so that they're right over at the edge of the woods, not coming across the asphalt, not wiping out kids on the hill.
Yeah.
I do think that, what Jake said is true, that a large portion of the users will be in school during the day. But I think that it does attract, we have an active biking community, so I think it will attract people beyond
No, I think it will too.
our students. But I also think that there are some, like the trails out back, the cross-country trails, and we have the hockey rink, we have the town playground, where we have people who come on those sites during the day, and we have to learn to coexist with the, people wanting to use those grounds and have our students be able to use them simultaneous. So I don't want it to be we're drawing boundaries around and don't come over this land during these hours, but I think that that can be something that we say, that we'd like to hear some conversation about what access ideas you have for how to create a clear path to that seems to not be disruptive if people are coming during the day. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think the way I would phrase it is I'd like to see the town be proactive in thinking about, and if necessary, invest in appropriate access points rather than just let it happen randomly. But given that, I agree, we coexist for lots of reasons, and I don't want to draw lines in the sand or do like I did with my brother in the 3rd grade where we put tape down the middle of the room, right? But I would like to see the town not just say, well, we built the park and we're done. I would like to see them take ownership of the access question as well.
I made that note about proactive.
Anything else? Okay.
One thing that I forgot.
Yeah.
So when we have the late October business meeting, Brian and I had discussed having an hour and a half before that option of walking through our buildings to really take a look at infrastructure, and so you can see some of these things that are talked about in this engineering reports and study. Is there interest in doing that? And if so, we might need to amend our motion, because I forgot to mention that at that time. Because I think if we're doing it as a group, it would have to be advertised. So, thoughts?
You and I, the 3 of us, have done a walkthrough relatively recently. So, I mean, I'm happy to do another one, but it was recent enough that I don't need it. So, I mean, but at the same time, if everybody else thinks, yeah, let's do one, and it's useful for us to all be there, then that's fine too.
We'd also talked about opening it up to the facilities committee to join us on that walk, because, some in that group may not have seen some of the infrastructure items that we're talking about, so.
It's close to Halloween. I think it should be Fright Night at the schools. Go look at the electrical panel, go look at the cracking lintels. I mean,
have candy apples or something.
In a lot of ways, I think it is mostly for Jeff and Aaron, since the 3 of us did a walkthrough a year ago, but also for the facilities committee. I don't know, Meg, if you have an opinion about the facilities committee wanting to do something like this or not.
I think it's not a bad idea.
Okay.
Timing as usual.
Right.
Personally, it's not necessary for me. I've been in the basements and boiler rooms here before, so I'm fine with it. But if there's interest within the facilities committee, I'd be happy to attend or schedule it or whatever.
Maybe we could just survey what were your thoughts, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm pretty familiar. I've been to the basement too, and all around the outsides. I've painted 40 doors and walked all around the outside of both buildings. But I feel like it might be something, I'm just sort of throwing this out there, that if we're going to do this public forum, that maybe you could have it like, if you wanted to come 30 minutes early and do, like, people who are interested could actually do a little, see what things look like. But I don't know if we want to open it up that big, but I think that that's how you sort of get people seeing what's really there.
We talked about that, actually, and we talked about, could we accommodate, we didn't know what the interest would be, but we definitely thought that having pictures of some of these things in the presentation on the 13th was important. But we could offer a couple of walkthroughs around that November 13th date, and just open it up for anyone that's interested. And facilities committee members could come, or people in the community that are interested could come. So if you think that might be the better approach. And then if some of you want to come as interested members of the community, then that's a different thing.
Would the town put up like a GoPro video,
Oh.
and you could walk through it?
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah,
smart.
that's a great idea.
I wonder if we have any students who would like to produce
To
that
put
video.
together, that would be good.
I mean, there's actually a very good section of pictures here, kind of in the back third.
The engineering reports.
In the engineering reports, chimneys that are spalling and pooling on the roofs, and I don't know how much of that we could tour, but yeah,
Right, we're not gonna go on the roofs.
right. But some combination of putting those pictures into the presentation, and yeah, it would be, if we get some students who could work with Brent. Again, the goal wouldn't be to tour the classrooms, because that's what everybody already knows, but to go to some of these points of concern. Just takes one picture of the electrical panels for me to know we have to do something about the electrical. But if a couple students could work with Brent to really make a GoPro video or
Yeah,
something
that's a
like
great
that, yeah.
We could embed that in our newsletter and things like that,
Yep.
so people could see it.
And we could still offer maybe one walk, just for people who are more interested in that type of
Kind of
access.
along the same lines, and I say this kind of jokingly, but kind of seriously, in addition to the GoPro, how many of these kids use drones, right? As far as looking at the roof and stuff,
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do a video
Yeah.
of the roof that way.
Okay.
all right, so it sounds like we're not gonna set up a board-specific walk, but we've got some good ideas for building public awareness. All right, any public comment? Seeing no public comment. Well, this is updated now. Our next board meetings will be October 30th at 6 PM, location to be determined. Tuesday, November 13th, the public meeting and town meeting at 6 PM in the Orono Middle School gym. November 14th at 7 PM, location to be determined. And Tuesday, November 27th, here in the Orono Town Council chambers at 6. Are there any requests for information or follow-up? Okay, we are going to have to put our caps on. We've got some really hard conversations ahead of us. But I think we do have a good base of information. I would motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Don't forget about signing the
Yes. Don't leave before you sign 5
No,
copies of
you
the